high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Catholic. I'm Jen Mauro, and with me today is a special co-host, EmmaLee Italia. Hi, Em.
Hi, how are you doing, Jen?
Good. How are you?
Good. Great to see you again.
I know. It's so exciting. So for listeners who don't know EmmaLee is a contributing editor for the Monitor magazine in the Diocese of Trenton. And she is also a longtime and familiar voice on domestic church media, of which you're probably listening to us right now. And what show did you have there, Em?
I had a show on parenting when the kids were much younger. It's been a little while since it's run, but I've got associations with the Manfredonia family. It's actually my husband's uncle and aunts who are co-founders of domestic church media. So it's always been a special part of our lives, and glad to be on again.
I'm excited. So EmmaLee and I have not worked together in probably 2 or 3 years, but we keep in touch, and I miss her terribly from my time when I was at the Monitor.
Likewise.
And so I am very excited that we are reunited here. So, and now we also have Trenton on the podcast. I think we've had most of the diocese in New Jersey on, and now Trenton is joining the podcast family. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's fantastic, I think, for all of the listeners out there, because we don't stay within our respective dioceses.
We do not.
We travel, we experience different places, so it's really nice to have that overlap.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, what's been going on at the Monitor lately, or what's coming up in the Diocese of Trenton? You know how hard, hold on, I'm just going to say.
You're ready to say Diocese of Camden.
Do you know how long it took me to train me to stop saying the Diocese of Trenton when I got to the Diocese of Camden, and now I have to go backwards? It's just going to blow my mind.
I'll trip too.
Okay,
so
good. If there's not any mistakes, then Mike Walsh will know that this is not a real podcast. So the more mistakes, the better.
Good point.
So what's going on in the Diocese of Trenton these days?
Oh, well, so it's back to school season, and everybody's quite busy. One thing that just came up as we were finishing our September issue of the Monitor, there's going to be a very special 9 a.m. Mass in St. Dominic Church. For those of you who aren't familiar, that's over in Brick on 250 Old Squan Road. And this Mass is going to welcome Antonia Salzano, who is the mother of Blessed Carlo Acutis. And if you don't know who Blessed Carlo is, he is one of the newest blesseds of the Catholic Church. I believe, was it last year that Pope Francis beatified him? He's not a saint yet, but the cause is, of course, open. But he's a very young teenage saint. He passed away from leukemia in his teenage years. Prior to that, he was putting together all of these wonderful websites dedicated to Marian apparitions and to Eucharistic miracles. In fact, we have the Eucharistic Miracles exhibit that he designed circling the Diocese of Trenton right now. And so it's going from parish to parish. If it hasn't appeared in yours, you can go to the website for the Diocese of Trenton and make a special request. I believe it's been in Camden too, right?
I believe it's coming to Camden. Trenton and Camden have been working to
Nice.
that, so you'll also be able to look forward to that in the Diocese of Camden as well.
Cool. So
when is that? When is she coming?
That is October 1st, 9 a.m. Mass, and that's going to be in the Brick Parish of St. Dominic Church. And on that occasion, our Bishop, David M. O'Connell, will dedicate the shrine to Blessed Carlo Acutis in that parish.
Very cool.
They already have a chapel that's designated, and they have a relic of his that's been designated for that parish to stay there.
Are there a lot of young people at that parish?
There are.
Yeah.
There's a school associated with St. Dominic's, and last year, I believe, Bishop O'Connell dedicated Blessed Carlo as the patron of all young people in our diocese. So this is really special.
Nice. That's
And it's
fantastic.
Open to all. So.
All right. What else is going on?
Let's see. It kind of connected to that. Another parish in our diocese, St. Mary Parish in Barnegat, just recently hosted the other Marian Shrines exhibit that Blessed Carlo designed, and he didn't finish before he passed away, so his supporters came through and finished it for him. But this is an exhibit. It's actually appearing for the first time in the United States at St. Mary's. So I don't remember. I wrote the article. This is terrible. I'm trying to remember the details of how it came, but through various modes of research, they were able to get in touch with the curator, the holder of the all the panels, and they can be printed at a cost and then shipped too. So I think they had them printed. They had a generous benefactor in their parish.
Wow.
And now they are going to have that on display, or they did, and they're willing to loan it out to other parishes in the diocese. So they said just call the parish office if that's something you're interested in, and they will work with you.
All right. Well, again, listeners, Diocese of Camden and Diocese of Trenton are pretty darn close to each other. We especially right along the... Oh, goodness, we're going to get directional, and I don't do directions.
Me neither.
Anyway, county lines, I guess.
Right, we're Mercer
Camden,
County right here.
Yeah, so. and Burlington are close, Atlantic and Ocean are close. So if you're in that area and you live in Atlantic County or anywhere along there in the Camden area, go down to St. Mary's and check it out.
That's right.
Anything else you want to promote really quick?
We have our annual standards, such as our Catholic Charities Guardian Angels Dinner Dance. That's coming up on September 21st. And the best place to get that information is at catholiccharities.trenton.org. And it'll give you all the information about how to get tickets. It's their annual fundraiser for Catholic Charities Diocese of Trenton. And our Mount Carmel Guild, which benefits a lot of folks in our particularly Mercer County and Trenton area, is having their annual gala, and that's going to be October 20th. And again, if that's something that you're interested in supporting, their website is MT for Mount, carmelguild.org/gala. I'll say that again, mtcarmelguild.org/gala.
Nice.
And that's where you can find all the information, including ticket purchases, and they're both a great time. I've been to the Catholic Charities one. I would love to go to the Mount Carmel Guild one this year.
Our Catholic Charities event is also our annual dinner is coming up as well, and October 11th, where that'll be in Atlantic City, and tickets are still available. We'll be honoring Dr. Ali Hushmand of Rowan University, and I go every year. When I was in Trenton,
nice.
I would go to the Catholic Charities dinners and gala, and when I'm in Camden, I love to go to them because you just meet the most amazing people at these events. And in the Diocese of Camden, we honor what's called our Disciples of Mercy.
Okay.
So those are people throughout the Diocese of Camden who have gone above and beyond to serve those in their community. And for our listeners, we just announced all of those Disciples of Mercy people who will be honored, and they are in this issue of the Catholic Star Herald that came out on September 15th, so check it out. So one of the big events also that is coming up in the Diocese of Trenton, which is why we are here today to talk to our special guests, is not too far. It's in St. Robert Bellarmine in Freehold. So whether you're, no matter what diocese you are in New Jersey, it's kind of right in the middle. So
right,
everybody come to this,
located.
and you're going to want to come to this after we talk to our guests today too. So let's say what this is, and then let's introduce our guests.
Okay, so we are introducing the Shroud Face to Face, which is an amazing book and upcoming film by Robert Orlando. He's a parishioner in St. Paul's Parish here in Princeton, and he's also a renowned filmmaker and author, and he's also finishing graduate studies at the Princeton Theological Seminary, biblical studies, am I right? And this book is opening up the shroud in a way, it's coming at it from an angle that I think hasn't been approached quite before. It's very forensic and of great interest, I think, to anyone who has an interest in relics and the history of the church.
So welcome, Robert. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us.
Thank you so much. I look forward to having this conversation.
I'm excited. I'm really excited. And who else I'll do the second one since
You
I
do.
threw you in that one. Like, I had all the notes, everybody, and then I just asked EmmaLee to do the intro. And then I was like, I'm like nudging my notes toward her. So yes, and then we also have with us Father Andrew Dalton. He is an expert in Shroud of Turin and a film consultant on this new film, and he's also at the Pontifical University in Rome, and he just got here from Rome. So thank you, Father, for being on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. This is great to have an interview. We can go more in depth on some of these topics. I love for the chance. Thanks for the opportunity.
And for everybody who listens to the podcast, you know that I've been talking that I'm from Texas often. Father is originally from Atlanta, so we did a little bonding over that earlier.
Good to be back this side of the pond, as they say.
There you go. So let's talk about the event that you guys are here for first, and then let's dive into like what's going to happen at the event, what's going on. So, Robert?
So it's on September 22nd at 7 p.m. at St. Robert Bellarmine Co-Cathedral in Freehold. That's the practical part of this. But I would say the event will go something like this. There'll be an introduction. We'll show a sneak peek from the film. And then Father Dalton and I will sit down and do some Q&A with the Monsignor at the parish, and then take questions from the audience.
And what is the name of the film?
The Shroud Face to Face. It's the same name as the book. Adapted from the book. Yeah.
And the book just published this month, is that right?
It's in pre-release
Okay.
because we're waiting for the full release with the film.
Okay.
But it's which means it's available in these select events. So one time only, get down here.
That's right.
Come
Get down
tonight.
Have it signed,
Yeah.
check it out.
Signed.
I heard a rumor that if you come to the event, you might get a special signed copy. They'll be available.
Here's a rumor. So,
Back table.
yeah. So tell us about the Shroud. Like, first, for those who don't know what it is, what is the Shroud of Turin?
So the shroud is held to be by many, especially amongst Christians, to be the linen cloth that wrapped the body of Jesus as he was taken down from the cross and now laid in the tomb. This was what was in contact with his corpse just prior to the resurrection, and indeed during the resurrection. And so much so that many believe that the image that is on this cloth, which is by far and away the most mysterious part of the cloth, it bears the image of a man, both the front and the back, the so-called ventral and dorsal images of this body, almost like a forensic glimpse at the sufferings of Jesus. And so might they be the result of the resurrection? Is that what we're looking at? This is, of course, the provocative question, and it's drawn all kinds of people to study the shroud, both secular people and religious people. And so for long centuries, the shroud was just venerated as a cloth for pilgrims expressing their faith, remembering, contemplating the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But now, in the scientific age, so much new study has been with regard to its authenticity, its historicity, the forensic accuracy of it. And so I think that is opened new interest in the shroud.
Robert?
For me, I think what's at stake, and I usually start the book off this way, but I also start the events and the talks we do by saying, if you think about what's at stake here, I think we live in a modern world which has a certain prejudice against faith because they have, I think, misunderstandings of what science is, that in some way science is a pure way to approach life through materialism alone, and issues of faith are somewhere out there that get dismissed, or the supernatural, the metaphysical. And even being a student of philosophy and knowing, like, philosophy 101, that's not possible, that faith and science are both being interactive. So I think, to me, and especially for young people, to once again blur those lines, properly blur those lines, opens the door for them to feel safe to engage subject matters that could possibly reintroduce them to the Christian faith, Jesus, the historical Jesus, and then with the meaning of Jesus, seeing him face to face, come to other decisions for themselves.
I have to say, I travel all over the world speaking about the shroud. I didn't mean to, but it's been the most fruitful part of my evangelization efforts. And the number one reason young people today say no to Christianity is, in a word, science. And so what a surprise if you can show them that actually it's the science itself which provokes the faith-based questions and then brings you into a quest that goes beyond the mere empirical side of things, what you can see, what you can measure. And the shroud it's almost like an occasion to evangelize through the back door. Now, I know that I should say from the start, that's particular to the work that I do at the museum and in the university, which is to present the religious side, the biblical side, in a rather direct way. I think Robert should explain his approach is not exactly the same there, and for good reason.
Yes, I was just trusting the natural instincts of, if this was an autopsy or I was a medical examiner and I could only deal with what I knew as a starting point before I got to conclusions or what it pointed to or otherwise. And frankly, I wasn't an aggressive skeptic, but I had no commitment to it. And coming from an Italian-American Catholic background, relics are everywhere. So I didn't want, I'm not going to spend my time. And then I lost my dad And he was elderly, but the way I lost him was sudden because he was going from the hospital and he was there with COVID, but he was heading out to rehab, and it was like a new start of life. And then he died the morning after I left him at the hospital. And it was sometimes the way people die could impact you as much as they're dying itself. And I just had that feeling all about like, well, I wasn't there when he died or how he died. How did he feel when he died? Was he in shock? So those questions left me lingering, and whenever you lose someone close to you, you start re-examining your own life and your timeline changes and you start prioritizing. And being in the film business, it's not as glamorous as people think looking from the outside in. It's a lot of work. It's a crazy life, and not very stable at times and all these other things, but it's full of noise, and especially with the political red meat all around us, the conversations. It all felt like empty and just white noise to the point where I wanted to step back. As part of my reapproaching things was, one, I decided to finish my graduate studies and go back into the finer grain of biblical studies and things I had known very well and studied for years, but also taking another look at my own faith and where I would come out, giving it the test of science or what my critical beliefs would be up to this point. So during that period, and I kind of ignored it initially, there was an executive from a network who said to me, who knew my other work, and some of my other work is played on their network, said to me, have you ever thought about doing anything on the Shroud? And I was like, no. And another filmmaker who's a partner of mine who's out in Hollywood, he and I worked together on a few films, and he was part of starting a Shroud Center in California. And he was saying, have you ever thought about doing anything on the Shroud? He was sending me things on the Shroud. And so it was like, I don't know where one ends and the other begins, but it was kind of like timing, my own interests, my own personal life, all came together, and I was like, I'll take a look at this thing. Why not? And I have pretty good instincts, and a lot of what I write, I approach like a crime scene. I have detective story instincts to tell a story like a riddle. So I figured, I'll know immediately once I hear the thing that blows up. Once I hear the detail of the piece of evidence that blows this up, I'm going to spot it immediately. So I went to this humble, rustic Shroud Center in the middle of nowhere, and to make a long story short, someone clicked on the image of the shroud lit from behind, and it was like it immediately catching the face. And it was the face, and immediately knowing the Bible, I could see in all the details in one fell swoop. And if you're old enough, like I am, in photography, people look at things through a loop, if you know what a loop is. So I was used to seeing through negatives. Mm-hmm. So my mind, for some reason, was totally unprepared to see the image that I'd always seen in the positive on the sheet, which is really a negative, but treating it as if it was a negative and I had a loop. And that moment was like an encounter. I wouldn't say like my whole world changed or whatever, but I knew that at a moment that this was not a forgery. I just knew this could not be a forgery because the level of detail, the anatomical consistency, the level of detail matching the biblical scriptures would be like a scholar would need to know the angle of where the spear went in and the crown of thorns, the way the blood dripped, the shape of the face, the fact that there was 3D imagery and details built into it. It just popped for me. So I'll call this the encounter. And in that encounter, I was like, okay, so this is something really genuine. It's an icon that I think maintains a certain level of mystique because it's not really a full 3D picture, so it leaves room to project into it. But at the same time, it's coming at you because if you know the history, it's someone got crucified and looks like this, and you know who's the most likely candidate. So I started my journey, and I went step by step like a crime scene. And I did, let me see what the science says and the forensics. Let me see what the counter arguments are. Let me get through that. And if I came to a point where I could determine that the linen was plausibly Jesus's cloth, burial cloth, then I could plug in the details of the cloth back into the Bible and take the context of the narratives from the Bible and just say, well, now you have the forensic evidence, now you have the testimony, you put them together and you've got a pretty strong case here of that being the burial cloth of Christ. And from that point forward, it becomes more of an argument of building a case. So you've got the forensic piece, the testimonies, and little by little, I just kept moving in that direction. And while, again, I'll leave the story at the end of the book for people to view it or read it themselves, to me it became like a 3D approach to a matter. It gets treated in 2D usually, like for or against, skeptic or not, or this is more like no. And I learned there's a lot of atheists and non-believers who come to the same conclusion. And I'll just say a couple of things to wrap up. One is there is no alternative there's no alternative explanation for what's on the cloth that's been satisfactory, I think, to serious experts. So no one's come up with, if it's not that, it's this. I'm convinced that the source of it is light. So I don't think that you can't do this. You can't do. I always make the joke. It's like it gets Monty Pythonish after a while. If you're going to get someone who's recently dead and beat them all the right ways, and then take the sheet off and put the other thing on and paint something, it gets a little crazy after a while. You start thinking of what the alternatives would be. So I came away saying, okay, so now you're looking at a light source of some kind, supported by a biblical history and supported by a lot of forensic challenges with some counterpoints, which we could talk about now. But I thought that was my journey, that was my narrative, and at the end, wherever I land, I'll tell my story, and that's how I approached it.
I wanted to pick up on something that you said about it, building a case. When I was reading through the book and the excerpt of the film that I did see when you presented back in June here at St. Paul's Parish, I really had the impression of an attorney who's presenting evidence, either an opening or a closing argument to a jury, and maybe not trying to, in a jury, you're trying to convince a jury. I felt like you were really careful to present the evidence, not in a way that was, I have to convince you of this, but here's the evidence, and it's kind of self-explanatory. It's self-revealing. You don't really have to work hard. Because as you start to pick apart all the details, you kind of cross off, well, it can't be this, it can't be that. And you're really careful to seek out experts in those fields who were either there at the original investigation or are experts in their field of understanding what happens over time to something like a relic, or what sort of physical things might be present to suggest this cloth is this old. And I think, for those who want to learn more and read the book and see the film, it's done in a way that I think others have not quite approached it like this, and I found it really compelling. It's a good story. There's just really no.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing. Is that when we just introduced ourselves, we said I'm an author filmmaker. But the truth is, if someone wanted to go to what is at the core of that, what's your expertise, it's narrative analysis. It's the ability to understand how a narrative is constructed. What's the poetics, basically, if people know that world of drama. But poetics that it has architectural rules for why stories are told certain ways, because you need X to happen in the beginning. If not, Y doesn't happen. But it gets pretty mathematical when you see the pattern over and over and over again. So what most people don't understand, and by the way, doctors and lawyers make good screenwriters for this reason when they transition over, because all of us, by constructing a narrative or a diagnosis, are extracting out of what all the data, the potential data is, to grab a narrative almost like the magnet that only picks up the red magnets, right? Or the green magnets because it's a red magnet. That you see that in all these processes, they're all extracting a narrative. That's why I said there is no pure science, because the science is what are you going to use as the paradigm to extract the data in the way, the alternative facts or your facts, how are you going to extract it? So all I was saying is that lawyers do the same thing in a case. They're going to say, this is the best story from the evidence and the way you could tell it. But where the science is way off, and I hope this film helps just to really mute the skeptics, get them out of the way, because they're stopping a lot of people from learning a lot of important things, is that what it does is it puts a bias in front of what everyone's doing, or it puts a blind spot, because the more honest approach would be like, here's the framework by which I'm going to look at this. I'm doing the legal framework. He's a killer. I'm going to set up so he was the one with the gun, and I'm going to make my case toward the end. So the worldview or the paradigm defines the details. So what I think you were experiencing is me just treating it with narrative analysis. Like, I need this, I need testimony, I'm setting up a case. So.
And are there, since Emily, you probably already know the answer, since I haven't read the book yet, are there experts in here as well that you've talked to, or if we're going to compare it to a court case, are there people testifying?
So you're looking at the expert first of all, and I got to say, I hope I say this with all the right words, but Father Dalton is an absolute blessing beyond belief, because he is my walking AI about the Shroud. I'm not joking, and I wrote that book pretty quickly. He knows my story, and I can write pretty quick, and I'm a good study, but without him, because he was my vetting machine. So he would be like, look, this is what I'm thinking this, and sometimes it would be like, all right, I got it. Got plenty, got it, moving on. But but he could do vertical dives on almost every subject matter in the Shroud quickly. And when you could dialogue with someone like that, so he would take me from possible, likable, plausible. Possible. Watch that one. That one. We're kind of weak in this. Yes, weak here. Weak. So yes, he played that. And in the film, it made so much sense that he is a guide to me.
Okay.
Who goes on my personal journey with me, literally in the film, and it becomes fun to do it. And you're looking at him.
So, Father, how did you become involved in the Shroud? Like before y'all even met? Like how were you called to that?
Well, do you know, I do feel like it has a calling, and one that felt, from my point of view, almost like an accident, because I was pursuing studies in theology and biblical theology. My expertise is in exegesis of the Gospel of Matthew. And so, meanwhile, on the side, I was introduced to Shroud studies at our Pontifical University, Regina Apostolorum in Rome. And thank you for the kind words, Robert. But if I've had anything good to share with you, it's because I myself have, like a midget standing on the shoulders of giants, been able to see further than I ever could by myself, right? So I think that we all receive from others. I just was blessed to be immersed in a world that was saturated with a lot of experts there in Rome. Something of a hub of Shroud studies is between Rome and Turin, as you can imagine. And so what a blessing that while I was studying theology, on Wednesday afternoons I could find the opportunity to attend a conference by someone who had written more than 15 books on the Shroud and studied it for over 30 years. That was my introduction from Professoressa Emanuela Marinelli.
I heard 23 books when I interviewed her.
Is that right? 23? Up to
yes.
23. Yeah. Wow. She's remarkable. In fact, we're just starting a new program that she's heading up at that same university, but more for lay people, those who have maybe less background in philosophy and theology, but at least to introduce them into Shroud studies. But there's so much there. It's a universe unto itself. We speak of Shroud studies. It's an umbrella term when you think about it, because what science can't study the Shroud. You could come at it from physics or chemistry or biology or forensic medicine, immunology, and they can all weigh in and say something interesting.
That's what's so great, is to see all these great minds, bringing their piece to the table and saying, well, this is what this piece reveals.
Exactly.
And then it all becomes like pieces of the puzzle that come together.
And it's the cumulative force of all of those things saying, hey, this is intelligible, right? These are that which you measure, that which you study, it renders real results that make, logical sense to us. And so when you see that here, there, and everywhere, now you step outside of your empiricism and say, well, what does that imply about the authenticity of this cloth? And there it's just the man, the woman who is reasoning and philosophizing about it. That's metaphysical at that point. And we're all doing this all the time, whether we realize it or not. Some of us are trying to be upfront about what we bring to the table as far as our preconceptions, and then test them against what's observable, what's measurable. And so I had the luxury of doing a year of study. Do you know that you can go to a Pontifical University and study for a full year the Shroud from so many different vantage points? And so one of them, the first week was a physicist, Paolo Di Lazzaro. The week after was Barry Schwarz, who was the technical photographer at the Shroud of Turin Research Project, and he gave us a 3-week course. I think it was 21 days of just lectures summarizing the fruits of those studies that resulted in 20 plus peer-reviewed journal articles. And we had immunologists, we have chemists, we have experts in funeral rites and Jewish funeral history, archaeologists. It was so fascinating. And then the side of history, the side of the papal documents. What have the Pope said down through the ages about the Shroud? And then what does theology have to say about the Paschal mystery, about what occurred in his passion, death, and resurrection? Can you hold all of these things together? And so it's really an interdisciplinary approach that then not only was food for the mind, but then downstairs in that same university we have an exhibition, we have a museum that presents visually through statue, through the instruments of torture, a life-size recreation of the Shroud itself. I was able, as a seminarian even, to guide students or pilgrims or tourists to Rome through this exhibition now explaining.
Not to interrupt, but by the way, also we capture this in the film, on film. Like he took me through what he's talking about now, just so for people who come to see the film.
And so this was just rehearsed again and again, presenting on the shroud from these different angles and receiving questions, and then myself going back to my professors and saying, but what about this or that? Over time, you pick things up. And so I was uniquely situated, I think, to then share this with others. And then Robert came around and said, let's put this on the silver screen and let's put it in a book. And that's what he captures so well. And wait till you see the visuals on this. This is what's so magical. And you put that together with music, with someone who knows how to tell story. It's compelling, it's captivating, and I think it moves people through that. What might be just an initial crime scene or a crime story, it segues so naturally into a love story. And at least this is my reading of it now, like the love story of God and humanity. That's what I think the Shroud is hinting at, dimly perhaps, but for those who go deeper or are ready to actually take seriously the questions that it raises, they're going to meet something that strikes deep into the soul.
So that's kind of, a question I had. Like, I think sometimes when you think the Shroud of Turin, your immediate reaction is the mystery of it, and is it real? Is it not real? All that. And there's been so many debunkings, and then completely the opposite. It's not debunked.
Debunking the debunkers.
Exactly. Oh, I like that. That's the name of your next book. Debunking the debunkers. But
Let's run that through the shows, people.
Write that down. But what can it mean in a deeper sense? Like, just put that part away, the mystery, and just say, what does this speak to me? Like, what was it that called you both even to investigate the Shroud?
Yeah, and I do think that's a personal question that will be answered differently by each one. But for me, the deepest call to the human heart is to encounter God face to face. And so for me, it's almost like a sacrament. It's a visible sign of a spiritual reality, which is our heavenly home is to see God without the mediation of any creature. But we're not there yet. We're on a pilgrimage in a valley of tears. And so we look to the cross, we look to the shroud, we look to these visible signs. But as we do so, to see with eyes of faith now, we understand that this is but the foretaste. It's a glimpse, a pale glimpse of a heavenly reality, and we're just barely scratching the surface of that. And so it draws you in to a contemplation, which is to bring you into a place which is ineffable. It's beyond the reach of words now. This is only explored in faith, and that encounter, that face-to-face encounter, is something that we already have in a kind of beatitude that is by grace. We have it. We're living the Christian life. We're already encountering the living God. He knows us. He sees us. We see him. But there's a veil. We await that day when it's lifted and we see perfectly. The shroud, to my mind, is a little snippet, a little glimpse of what our station is presently, aware that we are going to embrace him when the senses are flooded, are saturated with all, I don't even know the magic that occurs at on the last day at the parousia when we're resurrected and we share in his glory perfectly. But we need to know where we're going, and that's the end point. But if you're to fight the good fight, if you're going to run the race, it certainly helps to cling to those things that draw you into your plan, your station, your vocation in life.
The hope that we need when we're looking to run the good race. My family says that one all the time. All the time.
I feel like, we're able to explore some of these ideas simply because of our Catholic faith-based background, maybe at a more metaphysical level than maybe some of our other brothers and sisters who aren't quite there yet. But as you said, this is a vehicle, perhaps, through scientific exploration and evidence to maybe draw in some of those people to consider Christianity, consider their belief system, consider what's actually possible. And it feels like that door was open when the shroud was kind of rediscovered a little bit when the STURP, I forget what the acronym stands for. If
The
you could
Shroud of
remind me.
Turin Research Project.
And that was in the 1970s, correct?
1978.
1978. Now, when that came out, they basically could not determine that it wasn't authentic, right? Was that
Right.
the ultimate conclusion?
The ultimate conclusion, I would say, was summed up in this way, that it says that the image on the shroud is not human artwork, which is fascinating phraseology, right? Because what they're saying is, we don't know the means by which it was made, but whatever means they were not that of a human artist. Well, what kind
Then
of
what is
conclusion is that, right? That leaves open, then what did make it? And interestingly enough, now we've disproven that it's not a painting. There's no paint, there's no pigment, there's no ink, there's no dot, there's no brush strokes, there's no directionality with which some sort of pigment is impressed upon a cloth. And so if it's not a painting, if it's not a scorch, if it's not a photograph, if it's not a rubbing, what is it? And this is what remains an open question today. And that leaves room, of course, for Christians to say, well, what if it's the result of the resurrection? And that's, of course, we can't reproduce that in a laboratory. We can't tell you what kind of light effects accompany a resurrection. But what if that's what we're looking at, the result of a supernatural event, when a cadaver becomes a glorified, divinized human body?
Right.
And Father Spitzer in the film and behind the book states, and I interviewed him twice in over 3 hours, and he would say that even from a point of physics and the ability to create a formula, you could create the formula that would express the amount of light you would need, 1/billionth of a second versus, he describes it as a searchlight, a billion searchlights. But his point is, but we can't recreate it to prove that's what it is. But even from a point of formula, you can demonstrate it in physics. But I want to just go back to the questions you had. Two things. One is, I think of going back to the icon of the shroud, and then why my encounter with it, where it all, what looking back now in retrospect, what was that moment for me? What did it tap into? But
Yeah.
I think of the shroud like the symbol for H2O. It could be a vapor, it could be liquid, or it could be a solid, right? But the whole world, and I think it is the nature of the world of science being binary, and I think for a whole bunch of reasons, this is like more of a philosophical conversation, but the world gets divided up, and what most people are arguing is, no, the world is the vapor, no, it's the ice, and no, but they're just really all expressions of the same thing. And they dig in, and all the fights and probably wars and everything go on because there's different personality types, different limitations of perspectives and paradigms again and again. So when I looked at it, I was like, wow, all in one image is the person who comes textually to this, someone who's going to come from a story, someone who just needs to see someone suffering to be like, I know suffering, I've suffered my whole life, that man is suffering. And so it brings all the elements back into the H2O to say, like, there's a way to hold in tension individual types of expression or modes of understanding in light of a larger phenomena. So you're back, it's more like transcending the particulars but holding them all together. That would be like more of a philosophical thing. But from a pure, looking back now, from a purely personal one, look back, I'm a Pauline specialist in New Testament studies. And from years and years, I'd love to do another podcast on this, but I've written books on Paul, and finishing another one, which is a film down the road. To theaters coming soon. But my whole understanding of Paul all finally came to the theology of the cross. And you have the cross. I was bringing this, unaware at the time, bringing it to the image when the image first gave me that special encounter. Because even if you take the religious revelation out of this completely, there's an irony to the story of Christ that is so profound that even historians, I think, unless they're blocking it or being blind to it on purpose, it's a huge stumbling block. But the message of suffering as victory is so ironic to human thinking. It's so transformational that once you start thinking this way, what sounded crazy before now seems like the most real thing. Paul says, I counted everything prior to Christ as dung, crap, basically, in light of this experience. But he's suffering all the time. So when I saw that image too, I thought of the transformational power that the ultimate victim image would become potentially how we saw him to be the king in the world. It just makes no human sense on how this could work, and how could that icon, what it represents and everything, be this source of power. And I don't mean human power, but transformational human power, for where people commit to it to change their lives and accept something outside themselves. And so also I believe it's denied a lot because it's a moral calling. It's like, to look at Christ is not abstract knowledge. It's like, what do you think?
Right.
Here's the mirror. What do you think of this? So when I'm looking at the mirror, I'm like, wow, that was like transcendent moment, because I realized you don't have to say much of anything. You just kind of look and you're like, so the man who suffered the most and probably was the most innocent man, brutally killed in the most brutal way in the world, becomes the seminal figure of the West and probably the whole world in terms of moral, one of the most high moral standard in offering redemption. There's a deep irony in that I think connects with all of us.
And, I have to say, on the heels of that beautiful reflection, that as we're speaking, we've just experienced liturgically the segue out of the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, which was yesterday, and into what is today Our Lady of Sorrows. And I love this back-to-back liturgical 1-2 punch that tells exactly what you just described, is that this is an exaltation. Jesus's enthronement is what's happening on the cross. Well, yes, with those who have eyes to see, that's exactly what happens. Jesus says, when I'm lifted up, I will draw all people to myself. Like, how ironic that of torturous experience would be precisely what's we find most compelling, that this is the manifestation of divine love in its most radical form that is become central to the spiritual life. And even in every church you walk into, this is what we put front and center. We celebrate it. We're not hiding it. We're not ashamed of it. And why? Because it becomes the vehicle of our salvation. Like, this is the great story, that Jesus is actually defeating sin and death. And he is rising out of the tomb. The story doesn't end in the shadows, but he rises to new life. And so what was once sorrowful gives way to the deepest joys the human heart can ever experience. And so if today it's a feast day, Our Lady of Sorrows, it's like, what's to feast about that? Her heart would be pierced through. This was prophesied from the time Jesus was just a little boy presented at the temple. And there she is. You're like, what greater suffering is there than a mother to watch her own son be tortured in public in the most shameful of ways, and abandoned by his friends, and yet there she is, this pillar of faith, who, I love that little tidbit that we celebrate in today's gospel. She stood at the foot of the cross, Stabat Mater, and we see ourselves in that image, don't we? It's like she's telling the story of every Christian. She is sharing in the very sufferings of Christ. That, in today's liturgy, we have this great prayer. I want, if I can, just share from the collect, because
Please.
I really think, I was celebrating Mass today and thinking about this. It just gripped me so much. It says in the collect, "O God, who willed that when your Son was lifted high on the cross, his mother should stand close by and share his suffering, grant that your Church, participating with the Virgin Mary in the Passion of Christ, may merit a share in his resurrection." So it's like the idea that should we die with him, then and only then will we rise with him. If we participate in his death through, like Mary, watching, gazing, she is really suffering with Jesus. That's the compassion that we most need. And that's what's transformative. That's what's transfigurative. That's what makes us share in the merits of Christ's resurrection. Going down into the tomb, our stories don't end in darkness. We rise into the light of Jesus' new life. But if we don't, and this is the sad corollary to that, if we don't share in those sufferings, if we think that we can dodge the cross, if we think it is a sidestep suffering in our life, well, then those sufferings will crush us, and we won't share in the redemptive act of Jesus. And so far better to enter into the sorrows so than to share into the joys. But I think there's a fear, which is the story throughout the gospel, right? Like Peter says, no, Lord, you're not going to suffer, far be it. This is what we all do. We cringe from the cross. We get out of dodge the moment we see it coming. But if we have the courage through Christ and his story to embrace it, then our sufferings can be occasions of grace, of encounter, and that's what transforms us. And I think we need help. We need help from each other to carry our cross, to find the redemption on the other side of this mini death. And I think the liturgy does in its own way, feeding the imagination, what now we have so many opportunities in our day-to-day lives to share with others. I think what this movie and what this book does so creatively is in language that is very much at hand, feeding that side of the imagination, drawing you a little closer, maybe little baby steps closer. And then, boy, it's the liturgy that plunges you deep, deep, deep into the heart of Christ. But I think this was a very clever way.
So just to tie this back into the book and the crime scene, Paul uses the word in Greek scandalous, which is basically saying to the mind who comes to this going, well, I'm a materialist and I'm someone who, I only believe in what's real. This message is scandalous, as Paul was saying. So think about, again, crime scene, a victim killed, a scandal. Like, it's using language that, if you stripped it of its theological meaning, would be scandalous in its purely CSI terms. So why did he kill him? What was the problem? He didn't, if he's helping people and healing the sick, who was he threatening? And so I just wanted to mention that again, because to say it would scandalize a scientific mind, to have to start thinking the way we're talking about, is not a mental challenge. It's a spiritual confrontation. It's a moral confrontation.
The root word there is a scandalon. In the literal Greek is a stumbling block. So you imagine yourself walking along a road and you bump into a rock and you could trip, right? So it's the occasion for a fall, right? And so what do you do with the cross? It's a stumbling block to those who will not engage it deeply. But it's not the cross. There's this irony. I think that's the best way to put it. Is that it's actually this bridge, this cross that seems to be something that's in your way, is in fact the only vehicle to get you where you're called to go. Right? Because I love the way Augustine put it. He said, "You've made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Yeah. So some have put it like this: we've got a hole in our heart that's God-shaped, and we'll try to fill it up with 1,000 different things.
Pascal, right?
Yeah, and then, but it won't fill it, because only supernatural grace can fill that natural desire inside of you. And so what do we all do? We seek after 1,000 different idols. We play that game. We know it well. It doesn't end in a satisfaction that endures. It's fleeting. And so the cross is like, what? You're going to present yourself. This is what's going to fill my heart. This Jesus story. How does that work?
Right.
And then we realize that it's only in dying toward this is the grain of, unless a grain falls into the ground and dies, it remains but a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And there's a paradox there, that we have to die in order to live, that we have to lower ourselves. And I think, like with any good mystery, look, whenever you learn, you have to assume the position of a student, and you have to humble yourself to say, I don't know, but I want to know, and so teach me. And that happens at a spiritual level too, when we come into contact with the cross, is we have to say, what is this? What's here to learn? I'm going to embrace it. I'm not going to flee from it. I'm going to, courageously, like Mary, stand at the foot of the cross. And if it breaks me, so be it. But out of love, I'm going to stay here and see what's on the other side. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know the redemption that's on the other side. If we've had the courage to ever stay with Christ, we know, we've tasted that. That's just a little foretaste, I think, of the longer journey of our lives that ends in the face-to-face encounter in heaven.
And there's a history of Jesus introducing truth and mystery at the same time. They're always intertwined.
Yes.
I was just thinking the both and, right?
Yes, yes. And we're capable of holding those two things in our minds at the same time. And I think in our modern world, those two things have become much more separated in the cultural zeitgeist. Like, it has to be one or the other. It shouldn't be mysterious if it's the truth. But I think this harkens back to, no, there is a possibility of not completely understanding how something occurred, but it could still be the truth. It could still be reality. And like when in 1988, I was going to call back to that study that came out with the carbon dating, saying, oh, it's a hoax, everybody can quiet down about the shroud now. Carbon dating says it's from the 1300s, case closed. It's almost like it, the secular society was going out of its way to say, stop talking about this. But that study has been revealed to have flaws. And is there a plan? Do you know if there's another study that would be coming up on the Shroud of Turin?
Well, many of us really hoped so, but given the fact that it was such a fiasco in 1988 and it made such a splash that was, quite frankly, embarrassing to many, what are the circumstances that would allow for future testing? I think that's the question that's on the table. And the best I've heard about this is that there are centers of shroud study now all over the world. There's one in Cracovia, there's one in Valencia in Spain, in America we have them, in Rome, of course, in Torino, in Turin. But what if those scientists that formed part of the scientific committee at each of those different cities could come to a consensus about what a next step might look like, and then propose that so that the Holy See now could sign off on new testing and say, look, there's an international consensus that it would behoove us to do X, Y, or Z. And so that's what I think we're working for, to create the conditions of possibility for new testing to be done, but it's not on the horizon, quite frankly.
It also, carbon dating, from doing this and interviewing the experts, I found out is actually not as respected as it was then. It still has to be taken very serious. But just to give you one example, one expert brought up the fact that when carbon reads linen, it's reading all the environment that linen interacted with. So if there was a fire, and we know there was a fire, then that fire would be in the linen, and then who knows where else when it was transported here to there. So your carbon is very imperfect because it's reading carbon dating as to all the things that interacted with the shroud. It's not a pure investigation. That's just one, and then it's all the contamination, which going with the fact that originally it was a symbol of worship they carry on parades, and so interacts with fungus and on and on and on. So there's all these reasons to say there's probably even better methods at this point to determine that.
We just have a few minutes left, but I did want to ask one last question before we promote the event again. What do you think, or what do you hope people walk away with after reading the book and seeing the movie?
I think the skeptics need a big pushback here. I think first, the military side. It's like I think we have to lean in a bit more here and just push back. The Christian faith has probably been the catalyst for most scientific investigation. I don't know where we gave that one up, somewhere in the 19th century. But so number one, it's a big pushback, and we're done with the elementary school way of talking about everything in terms of politics and power, and it's time to open mystery back up because we don't live in the space of tribes, and we could, but it's like elementary school again. And then the other one would be, I think it is giving hope or pointing to something, because in the end, I guess I would say, Christian or not, and I think if I have a son too, and I have a heart for young people, especially college age, going from high school to college age. But I would think that if they've been told their whole lives that everything's silly beyond what they could feel and only feel with their own senses, the chance of them having an authentic life at all is closed off, because it's only in finding purpose and meaning beyond seeking out your own pleasure every day that you have a chance at it. So this also opens the door to a conversation that's broader than the shroud itself, but like an orientation toward the world. And that would be the hope part of it, is engage again that way, but you want to hear the reasons why. We have all the reasons why. If you want to get philosophical or argumentative about it, we have all the reasons. We've got a history of reasons. Right. So it's not a passive. It's not me being opinionated, but it's not me being passive either. So.
Well, I would say my hope for this book and its accompanying film would be to share all this great information beyond the little bubble it's been in so far. And it might feel like a big bubble, depending on how much exposure you've had, but really, if you compare that to the world at large, I mean, a good case in point is my friend Barry Schwarz, who lectures on the Shroud. He's Jewish, by the way, but he's convinced that the Shroud is authentic just on the sheer empirical evidence of it all. And he'll travel, and the number one reaction that he gets is still, the Shroud, what's that? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people just don't know about it, or at least, I don't know if this is still the case, but at least a few years ago, the second thing that he would most often hear was, oh, the Shroud wasn't that proven to be a medieval fake. And so now this is a matter of mainstream science that we can't look with confidence to the testing in 1988 to say this is definitively dated. That has been debunked, and it's been debunked in such a radical way that even any self-respecting skeptic won't quote that anymore as a definitive data point. And so I think that this is the chance that, given that you've interviewed who you've interviewed, I mean, the prominent people in different universities and from different sectors, makes this, I think, has an outreach that the Shroud maybe never has had before. Just the quality of film and the quality in which it was done, I think it stands to reach a very broad audience.
Well, the trailer is fantastic. I mean, like you were saying, the quality is phenomenal. So, you want to tell everybody again, where the event will be next week?
It's going to be
Freehold?
September 22nd. That's Friday, from 7 till about 9 p.m. And it's going to be in St. Robert Bellarmine Co-Cathedral in Freehold.
And the website?
Yeah.
theshroudfilm.com, which has a lot of information, even well beyond this conversation. And I really hope people will go to the site and stay in touch with us for future events.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Orlando, Father Dalton, EmmaLee, thank you all so much for being on the podcast. I wish you the best with this book and the movie. And everybody, get out to Freehold on Friday, September 22nd. Listen to these two amazing men talk more about the Shroud, see parts of the movie, I believe, and pick up the book, The Shroud Face to Face. Everybody, it's been another edition of Talking Catholic, and thanks so much. Have a great week.